I'm Thomas Mills for Politics NC. Welcome to the inaugural podcast of Restless Natives, a discussion of North Carolina politics from people who've lived and breathed it for years. We have today Travis Fain, who is a former reporter who covered North Carolina politics since the before times, before Republicans took control of the state and sent us in a whole different direction than they did for the previous 60 years. Travis today is a communications consultant extraordinaire who can help you get your message out and reach the people you need to reach now. And then we have Anderson Clayton. Anderson is chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party and a rising star in national Democratic politics. I really appreciate you guys being here, and thank you for helping me kick off this dynamic new podcast that's going to get so many views. Anyhow, so that's where we are. I feel like we got to kick this thing off by talking about the Supreme Court race in North Carolina. It's the last undecided race in the country. You know, I'm going to let Travis give you the description of it because my description of that race is not going to be very kind. I don't believe that it's really a race. I believe it's an attempted burglary where the Republican Party has broken into North Carolina and is trying to steal a Supreme Court seat that has been decided clearly. So, since I've given my little editorial view of that thing, let's let Travis, can you kind of tell us what happened and what's going on? I think a lot of people probably know, but let's give them a background.
Yeah, I don't think you're that far off. I think the partisan view here is very close to the objective view here. And, you know, I don't like to say he's trying to steal an election, Jefferson Griffin, but I think it's fair to call it that. I mean, basically there was a disagreement heading into this election about what people had to provide in their voter registration. The Republicans did not like some of the leniency that the State Board of Elections gave, but the courts blessed it. We moved forward into the election, and now after the fact, Judge Jefferson Griffin's campaign is targeting, you know, only people in areas where they think, most of these people probably didn't vote for us. Let's throw their votes out only in my race, as opposed to, across the board. And then he's gotten his buddies on the Court of Appeals and maybe eventually the state Supreme Court, because there's, you know, Republican majorities in both places, to order that. So that's where we are. The guy who in college dressed in Confederate regalia for a party and whose first name is Jefferson got his buddies or he's trying to get his buddies to throw out a bunch of election results. That's just the facts.
Thanks for that nonpartisan perspective there. And so Anderson, let me ask you, what is the Democratic Party doing about this? I mean, it really feels like it's kind of lopsided here now that we've gotten to the upper echelons of the court system, where Republicans dominate the Court of Appeals, and, you know, the Court of Appeals basically said that they're giving validity to Griffin's complaint, and if it goes to Supreme Court, the court looks likely to split 3-3, and that would make that lower court a ruling stand. Do you know what the party's doing, or let me rephrase that? What is the party doing?
Unlike Travis, I think I would call it a stealing an election, and I feel just fine by saying that on this podcast. And I don't know when this thing comes out where this case might be or what rulings we might have seen come down. And so I think it's important for folks to know that they can get involved by going to ncdp.org/protect the vote, because we're going to make sure that we're mobilizing folks to see if there needs to be a cure process in place after the state Supreme Court rules on this. And then also, we're going to appeal it to the federal process too, if it allows for it. But Justice Allison Riggs has been very clear throughout this that she fully anticipates this to go up to the federal level before the Republicans let it die off with the failed attempts of being able to steal something 6 months after an election is over with, and also being able to waste taxpayer dollars and time while this has been going on. I do think someone compared it recently, and I didn't think about this, and I think I should have in historical context in terms of the Wilmington insurrection in 1898. And I think that what we're seeing right now is the modern day version of that, right? Of where Republicans are trying to deny voting rights access for specifically, I mean, a lot of the people on the list that Griffin is targeting are Black and brown individuals across North Carolina. And that wasn't research, quite frankly, I should put out there, the state party did. Shout out to Chris Cooper and a bunch of, political scientists across the state that decided they were going to look into it. I kind of sat there and I was like, I don't care who the hell is on this list. We're going to make sure that they know it, because I think that anybody, especially if you're a Republican, would like to know that your vote is being challenged. But especially by your own party, right? I mean, that was sort of the wild aspect of it to me. But, it is reminiscent of a time that was a very dark period in this state's history. And I think that we need to remember that too. And for me, as a younger person in this party right now, I'm trying to put that into context for a lot of people.
Well, I appreciate
it's interesting, y'all, as this does eventually probably head into federal court. It's gotten some national attention, but I think that'll ramp it way up. I have been interested that the powers that be in the Republican Party are either largely silent on this situation or are actively supporting it, because I think they are going to take a hit that, someone's got to calculate how much a Supreme Court seat is worth to the party versus the reputational damage of trying to flip this election in a way that's pretty transparently bad.
I was on a DNC press call the other day, and I literally said that. I was like, man, we should ask members of Congress, the legislature, every single other court, like whether or not they agree with this, because the number one reason why that hasn't happened yet is that no one's asking them about it. Like, we don't have national press in this sort of, I think, really focused on this case right now. We saw it a little bit, to your point, after the Court of Appeals decision came out. But I think a lot of people are like, oh, Republicans won't do this. And I'm like, you ain't ever met North Carolina Republican. They'll do a bunch of shit you don't believe.
Yeah. Well, they're actually trying to start to strip away voting rights at the federal level now, with that what do they call it, the SAVE Act that they just passed. What I keep telling everybody is we've been going through this in North Carolina since Republicans took control of the legislature. They have been trying to make it harder to vote and targeting very specific groups to make it more difficult to vote. They're eroding democracy. And Anderson, I think you're dead on about it's not just Wilmington, it's the whole way we stripped voting rights away, mainly from African Americans, but also from poor whites, for almost 65 years, until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 corrected that. And it feels like we're going kind of a back to the future thing, because the Supreme Court, the federal Supreme Court, not the state Supreme Court, the federal Supreme Court has been whittling away at the voting rights of 1965 since I think 2014 was the first time they did it. But they keep taking the powers away from that act, and it really does feel like our voting rights are under assault right now, and it's the first time in 125 years that we've seen it. I mean, we've lived from the 1960s. Even me, was born in 63, but my whole life has been the process of expanding access to the ballot. And all of a sudden, a decade, 15 years ago, Republicans took control of North Carolina, and they've been trying to turn it back ever since.
Let me throw out a word of caution on stuff like that, though. Like, there are points to be made there. But one thing a place where I think Democrats run into some rocks near the coast is they overblow things a little bit. You can make these points without comparing it to a violent coup in Wilmington. You can make these points without comparing it to things that happened 125 years ago. You have to be really careful about matching people's lived experience in your description. So while I think y'all have good points to make in these areas, I just always caution, if I'm talking to a client or whoever, just be careful not to take the ball too far, because that's how people start to tune you out.
Anderson and I aren't cautious.
What do you think about that, though, in the context of, like, I'm not going to lie to y'all, I got reached out to by some faculty members within the UNC system, right, who are like, why are we not organizing protests right now on campuses around, like, students' visas being revoked and, like, the things that are happening in the sort of cover of darkness, right, with the Trump administration? And I'm like, how do you not make a comparison with something that's like that has a historical context to that without like helping people understand the magnitude of like, this has not happened before. This is not normal for people to see. And it is unprecedented, I think, like what is going on. And that's where I was sort of like, yeah, maybe the last time that we did see something this insane when it comes in of like Republicans genuinely trying to cancel out votes is another sort of extreme measure. And I think that's where like I'm trying to navigate too. How do you bring people to understand that this is crazy? And because people are right now, I genuinely think you see everything happening at once, and Republicans are good at this at the national level of like bombarding people. And so you don't really, it's like putting people to sleep, sort of like they just become out of tune to it. And I'm like, I need y'all to wake the fuck up. Like we can't be asleep at the wheel here, and we can't let everything that's coming at us like that not remind us that this is still insane and that we don't have to deal with it. I don't know.
Well, I want to switch gears just a little bit, because I think some of what you're saying about, you were talking about the protests, you were talking about talking to a younger generation. I want to talk a little bit, since we actually have a gray beard here, and we have also the younger generation and Travis in the middle here. Let's talk about some of this generational divide. There's been a lot of written right now about the the Democratic Party nationally has two factions, and they're not progressive versus moderate. They're older versus younger. And we saw that really play out, I think, when you saw Schumer cut a deal with the Republicans to keep the government running, and you had a younger group of kind of activists. Bernie was part of it, who's not very young, but still, it was led mainly by younger leaders who wanted a stronger response. And I think we're seeing that tension play out a lot. My perspective really is that it is time for people, maybe not as young as me, but people who are a little older than me, to give up a little bit of their control. I think Nancy Pelosi was probably the greatest speaker in history, or modern history. I mean, she was able to govern that caucus in an amazing way with very narrow majorities to get big things done. She shepherded through the Obamacare. But at the same time, when she stepped down, I feel like she should have either retired or stepped back. She's kind of stayed in the fray, pushing things. I think Schumer and others don't really understand the media environment anymore. It's left them behind. And back to Restless Natives, Anderson, you guys are native to this. I mean, when I came along, we didn't even have computers until I was in my 20s, really, access personal computers. So, we've been trying to learn this stuff as we go along, and you guys have come up. You totally understand social media. You understand this world where everybody's being recorded in a way that I don't think that the leadership of the Democratic Party does right now. You shouldn't throw away wisdom, but we need leaders who can relate to an emerging generation, not folks who are living in the last generation. And Anderson, I'll throw that to you to start with, just to see kind of your thoughts about this generational divide.
I mean, I think everybody's craving to see new people involved with politics, and that's not just saying younger, it's just saying folks that maybe are not the same folks that have been leading right now. And I think that we're going to see, and we already have across the country, a lot of young people that are stepping up to run in primaries, that folks that are like, we're not waiting our turn anymore. And I think that that's the same thing about how I got involved with this. I stuck my neck out there, and a lot of people looked at me when I ran for state party chair and they said, are you ready to never work in politics again? And I think that for a long time in our party, it was if you step out of line, like they're going to come in and cut you out from beneath you in some ways. And I feel like right now we're in a changing of the guard phase where a lot of people realize we got our asses handed to us last election cycle, and it was because we didn't embrace change within our own party. And I think that we have a lot of people, and a lot of younger generations, or a lot of people in the younger generation, I think differently about policy issues. To your point, I don't necessarily think it is progressive versus moderate. I think it is very much so older versus younger, or maybe like newer versus older, because I do think that, you get kind of like there's a missing middle in politics between 20 and 40-year-olds, basically, that is still people that are raising kids people that are having that are just busy. They're working 2 jobs right now. Like, they are not able to politically engage. And I think that is a huge population of people that you're seeing start to become more and more active as Trump's policies and sort of politics is hitting them where it hurts the most, which is in their pocketbook and when they go to the grocery store. And you've got a lot, like, I talk to moms every day, to be honest with you right now, that are more and more interested in getting active with the Democratic Party and helping us message better. And the last thing that I would say on what you said there, Thomas, because I thought it was interesting, I think the Democratic Party, like the media apparatus, we do not have the scalability right now to get a message out there like the Republican Party does. And recognizing that and owning that is something that we have to do first. Like, we are still building an apparatus for the Democratic and also more of an oppositional media ecosystem that can combat what Republicans have spent 40 years building up and setting up in the country. I quote you all the time, Thomas, to people, because I look at folks and I'm like, no, there's this great guy, Thomas Mills, in the state of North Carolina, and he goes, when Republicans were buying television stations, or Democrats were still buying television ads, and people across the country go, that's it. And I'm like, yeah.
My tune. But I again, I feel like I can see this, but I do believe that you guys understand it way better than I do. And that's, and I think most of my generation. What do you think, Travis? Do you see this divide as a problem?
The old reporter in me pines for a day when at least it didn't seem like, well, there was a Republican media. Now, let's build a Democratic media. Because, it's all propaganda at some point. It's just whether or not you agree with it and whether or not you like its ultimate goals, as opposed to us all kind of singing out of one set of facts. So it's a shame, but clearly the Republicans have done a very good job of building kind of a conservative media empire. But that was also, why were they able to do that? Because of a backlash, right? Because a lot of people felt like the media was too liberal. And I know, as being a reporter, I
because they told the truth, Travis. You called us. I was like, he's like, you're trying to create propaganda machines, and I'm like, no, maybe I'm just trying not to let people listen to disinformation. I don't know. And maybe Democrats tend to want to tell the truth because it's Democratic policies to help people. I don't know. Okay, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
I don't know that there is any partisan lean on wanting to tell the truth or not. I think the Republican Party has lost its mind and lost its way right now. I can't dispute that in any way, shape, or form. That seems clear. But I've had Democrats lie to me in the past. I can confirm that. And I think Democrats have also, a lot of Democrats in power have felt like they were entitled to positive media coverage. And when I run into that, I ask, well, why do they feel that way? And maybe it's because of past experience, or maybe it's something else. But it's not intrinsic to being a Democrat or a Republican. But yeah, look, it's so the real challenge of getting your message out there isn't like, oh, well, we don't have our own version of Rush Limbaugh or whoever the conservative talk radio hosts are these days. It's, you're not just competing against other news operations. You're competing against games on people's phones that are addictive. You're competing against anything that might take their time in life. And it's just so much easier to focus on things you enjoy on the most powerful device really to ever exist in humanity that we all have in our pocket, as opposed to, well, let's see what the amortization tables say about Social Security and Medicare, and let me make sure I follow the federal budget as it moves through the House and looks like it's going to continue to explode our national debt. It's just you're not just in competition with people who disagree with you politically. You're in competition with Candy Crush.
Right. Yeah. I will say about that the rise of right-wing media. It's something that I've tracked for a long time. I was living in rural North Carolina when Rush Limbaugh really kind of hit his stride. And, I'll be honest with you, I don't know for sure, but I would suspect if you went back and tried to play some of the Rush stuff from the early 80s, you couldn't do it because it was so racially tinged. It was a reactionary rise to to really the civil rights movement. And it was a lot of angry, almost all white people who called themselves ditto heads because they believed everything he said. And Roger Ailes, who was not a media guy, he was a Republican political consultant. He said, hey, let's take what this guy Limbaugh's doing and put it on Fox News. And he gets Rupert Murdoch to underwrite it. It was never made as a news station. It was made as a propaganda outlet by a Republican media consultant. And Democrats tried at one point. Al Franken had, what was it, Radio Free America, or whatever it was. He had a radio show that failed. And what we realized was, well, Franken was fun and interesting, but really we still get all our news from NPR. If we're listening to the radio, we were listening to NPR. They were listening to talk radio. I mean, Rush, by the end of the 1990s, there were so many Rush Limbaugh imitators out there that right-wing radio was just flooded the airways. And we always kind of said, well, we're going to listen to what we believe was the truth. And you're right. Maybe it was liberal. Maybe it was more liberal. But I think at the end of the day, those news outlets, and cable really blew it up, but ABC, NBC, CBS, PBS, they were trying to get it right. Even if they missed, even if they were wrong, the goal was to try to get something out there. And maybe it was wrong sometimes because of a perspective. But the difference was the rise of the right-wing media was never about trying to get it right. It was trying to persuade a bunch of people to a point of view. Then it took off on steroids with the internet and social media. That's what happened to us. And now we've got entire segments of the population who don't get anything but the propaganda, and they believe it is the gospel. So, anyhow, I'll get off of that because...
No, I was sitting here thinking, I was like, dang, we need to get Rob Christensen and Thomas Mills on a thing together to talk about that, I feel like, in some aspects of just how... Because, he has the whole aspect about the book that he just did with the News and Observer and sort of what it... And honestly, when people look at me and they say, what the hell happened in North Carolina this year? What do you think was the difference in North Carolina and other states? I was like, the fact that I think we have a very strong, even though it is... A lot of journalists would look at me right now and be like, Anderson, it's failing. But we have a strong news apparatus in North Carolina. And they do try to tell the truth. And it is a place where I'm like, not every state has that. And we are losing rural newspapers faster and faster each year. But I'm like, there are still enough in strong places that I feel like they're still able to help tell the story of what's happening in local and state government that people are still paying attention to. And WRAL did a really good poll that talked about how, people believe local news more than they do federal news right now. And to your point, Thomas, I just think Democrats didn't take it seriously enough either. We looked at the internet, and even after Barack Obama gave a historical campaign where sort of he built up grassroots energy and everything on that site, it was still something that our party looked at and was like, social media, and I'm like, now it's no. And there's a whole generation that's coming into the party that says we've got to reprioritize, how do we focus on still boots on the ground organizing, but also being in digital spaces and creating a way for politics to meet people where they are. And to Travis's point, on their favorite game, on Jeopardy, on late night, I don't know, on any way that you can figure out how to integrate that into what people are doing in their everyday lives. And that can be hard to do, I think.
I think that's right. We got a few more minutes here, and if you guys both have time, I'd like to switch gears briefly to talk about the U.S. Senate race in North Carolina. And the reason I want to talk about that is I believe it's going to be the most contested race in the country next year. There are a bunch of Democratic retirements that could make some other states big, but North Carolina is going to be big for a lot of different reasons. One is we've been swinging and missing for a long time here. It's about time that we win one. But the other thing is I think you have Tom Tillis, who is really I think Tom Tillis is a contemptible fellow, to be honest with you. And the reason I believe he's a contemptible fella is because he knows what's right.
Don't hold back, Thomas.
Not me. I've never watched a politician who clearly knows the right thing to do and tells you he knows the right thing to do and then turns around and does the wrong thing over and over and over again. and then he panders to the wrong side, trying to make him sound like he's part of them when he's really not. I mean, the problem with Tillis is not that he's a MAGA Trumper. It's that he's not a MAGA Trumper, and yet he tries to pretend to be to them, and then he comes over here, tries to talk to the middle and act like I'm a real moderate guy. And yet, if push comes to shove, I'm going to vote with MAGA if it's going to hurt my damn career. But, I'm off topic. Somebody should have grabbed me and said, come back in here and talk to us. But, I can go on with my disdain for Tom Tillis, but at the end of the day, because of that, because MAGA sees through him. They know he's not one of them, and no matter how hard he tries. And, the middle that a lot of times doesn't pay that much attention to politics, they just kind of don't really like him that much either. So he's starting this race way underwater. And I believe that 2026 is going to be a low turnout election year where the people who don't show up are going to be the MAGAs. They're going to be the people who show up just for Trump. They didn't show up in 2018. They're not going to show up again in 2026. They only show up when Trump's on the ballot. And we're going to have a fired up base. We're going to have Democrats ready to go out. What we need to do is get a candidate. Democrats need a candidate. And, I want Roy Cooper to run. I think that he's the strongest candidate in the race. I think he's one of the most popular governors. Leaving the governor's office is one of the most popular governors in the country. And I respect him if he decides not to run, because he's put an incredible amount of his life into North Carolina. But I think he's the best candidate. We had Wiley Nickel got into the race, and Wiley's a nice guy, but his whole career has been as a politician. And I think that we're at a place in politics right now where people want something more. And you can argue that Cooper's has been in politics too, but Cooper's got a track record, and Wiley really doesn't. I mean, he's been, not his fault. He came into the minority of North Carolina State Senate, and he ended up in the minority in the U.S. House. There's not a whole lot you can do, but I think people are looking for folks who can get things done. They're looking for a little bit of a steady hand, and I think that's what Roy Cooper can provide, and he offers a pretty nice contrast to Tillis. Thoughts?
Henderson, who else is getting in?
The Democratic Party does not get involved in primaries, is what I want to put the caveat, my TLDR at the end of all of this, in every way, shape, and form. And that I'm interested to hear Travis's opinion on all that. But I think that the one thing that I would say is that Governor Cooper's got a legacy of experience in the state. So does Congressman Nickel. And we've got a deep bench in North Carolina. I think folks would be surprised at who else would be willing to throw their hat in that primary. And I remind people, I'm like, Michael Regan was the former director of the EPA and also the former mayor of Charlotte. Like, y'all got to be real here about Rachel Hunt just won a lieutenant governor's race in a race where no one anticipated her to, that was also with Donald Trump on a ballot. I'm like, we've got a lot of really good talent, and I think that, Republicans don't, quite frankly, at the statewide level in North Carolina. A lot of their members in the legislature are old, and a lot of them, I'm like, you got maybe a few people in line, but not any that are running statewide anytime soon that I think are worthwhile. And I'm like, I do anticipate us to be able to have a soaring ability in the Democratic Party to have a candidate across the state that can represent each different community's needs and interest and what they want to see represented by North Carolina at the United States Senate level. Because I agree with you. One thing in that you just went on and spiel Thomas Mills is that Tom Tillis ain't it by any circumstances. But Travis, what do you think?
I think you're exactly right about the deeper bench than people give the Democratic Party credit for. I think it's the deepest bench that I've seen in my time covering, paying attention to politics here, which is not as long as you, Tom. But Cooper would obviously be, he's number one, he's number two, he's number three. It's just there's no comparison to anybody else. Wiley Nickel, I tell you what, we used to joke in the press corps about, how often he'd put out a press release, et cetera, et cetera. But, he's doing something right. I feel like I read 5 different times this dude was announcing a U.S. Senate run. He has made the press, at least, pay attention to what he's doing here. And, I know we've been getting mailers at my house talking about some of the things that he did in Congress. It is obviously a name recognition play for the United States Senate. So he's smart, and he's surrounding himself, I assume, with people who know how to generate attention. What that all means, I think you're probably right about 2026 turnout. Yeah, I just don't understand the idea of people don't vote if they're not excited, though. I mean, isn't that the problem right there? Isn't that the problem? What if I just said, oh, my car needs an oil change, but I'm not excited about that. I'll just drive it till it catches on fire. Well, that's stupid. That's stupid.
Yeah.
You don't have to be excited to vote. You don't have to love the candidate that's on the ballot. You pick the one that's closest, you vote for him, you do your duty, and if you don't like it, run for office your damn self and quit your whining and complaining and getting on Facebook and saying, why isn't someone doing something? Why don't you do something? You know, these university folks, Anderson, are reaching out to you like, why aren't y'all protesting? Get your own ass out there on the university common and protest. I mean,
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm big
you're
on
right.
personal
Okay,
responsibility.
well, some people, though, you do have to, I think some people need guidance. But also, anybody that wants to run for office, Travis just gave a great plug. You should do it. ncdp.org/run-for-office. Sign up today. Join us.
I think we need more involvement. I'll be honest with you. The one thing I give Trump credit for is exciting people. It may be exciting against him, but, you know, I think he really did inspire kind of a new generation of activism among Democrats and to some degree among Republicans. You know, the difference is that the Democrats that are coming out are a younger generation. Anderson's generation are coming up. And the Republicans seem to have activated people my age. I mean, I looked at the people who attacked the Capitol, and they sure looked a lot like me than they did.
Let me tell you what, we ain't monolithic. And I have met some young folks this last couple of weeks, and I'm like, oh, I am concerned about this certain generation that's also coming up behind me. And like, I'm Gen Z, and I claim that, but I think that there's been really good research on sort of the differentiating Gen Z in terms of people that were in high school and college, like, you know, pre and post pandemic, and sort of what that has done to folks. And I think it was an interesting experience, like whether or not you were in college when Trump's first presidency happened versus if you were, you know, in high school or in college coming up under a Biden presidency. And I think the way in which people get activated in politics really matters. Like, are you being activated by hope, or are you being activated by fear? And that's a lot of what I think is driving young people right now, at least in my opinion.
I think that's good. Well, I really do appreciate you guys coming on today. This has been inaugural podcast of Restless Natives, because I'm a restless native, buddy. But anyhow, I think it went well. I hope you guys had a good time. Anderson Clayton, I appreciate you taking time. Travis Fain, thanks so much for being here. I'll get in touch with you guys soon, and let's hope we can come back in a week or so and see how this thing goes. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Thomas.